we will be unified in our voice and in our desire to see change. We must be separate in our bodies. So please practice social distancing, make sure you're 6 feet apart. Sadly, racism is not the only scourge we have to contend with. We do have to contend with the pandemic. So please make sure, look around you and make sure there's 6 feet between you and the next person. And I'm very happy to see a lot of people, almost everyone, wearing masks. So thank you very much for that. The other thing is we have a great series of speakers. We will be sticking to this lineup only. Very strong speakers who are here to share a bit about their words and their thoughts. So we ask, of course, that you listen to them with respect and with your utmost attention. And we'll be calling them up shortly. And in addition to everyone here, I also want to say we are live. We are also online. I think we have over 50, 60 people who are joining us online. So let's give a shout out to the people who are joining us online. And we've seen these protests in the big cities. We've seen them in Minneapolis. We've seen them protests and vigils. We've seen them in Minneapolis. We've seen them in Seattle and DC and LA and Atlanta. But what you don't see, and what I think is even more important, is in hundreds and thousands of small cities and communities and villages and towns and counties across this country, cities not much bigger than San Carlos, they're coming out and they're raising their voice in support of Black Lives Matter, against racism. So this is not a big city thing, because the anxieties and the scourge of racism permeates not just big cities, but even our own community. So for all of those who have organized something similar in a small town or a small city across the country, let's give them a big round of applause too. Woo! Louder. This is across this country and around the world. But the point of this is it's a peaceful vigil. It's a time of reflection. We've seen so many painful images over the course of the past few weeks. And now I think many of us, myself included, are beginning to realize that this is the pain that the African American community has felt for a very, very long time. So for everyone out here who's white, this is a great opportunity to listen, to offer your support, but more important, to listen and to get yourselves educated. And I think that's going to be a big part of this event this afternoon. It's a time to reflect. It's a time to think. It's a time to internalize about what we can do to make this a more inclusive community for everyone. So we have a wonderful series of speakers. We're going to have the people you're going to be hearing from this afternoon. We have Leanne Brown, who graduated from Carmont and is going to be attending, and who currently attends Cal State Fullerton. We have We have Rachel Amir Chapman. She just graduated from Carmont and was the senior class president for that year. We have Nalad Shafai, who just graduated from Carmont also. He's going to be heading off to UC Berkeley. And to kick us off, I am very pleased to introduce Cindy Chan, who also just graduated from Carmont and who will be heading off to UC San Diego. Cindy, can you kick us off, please?
All right, thanks everyone for coming. Tonight I'll be reading Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but long for still, and his tune is heard. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but long for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Cindy. Can we give us a big round of applause for Cindy, please? right, next up we have Milad Shafai, who's going to come up and share a few of his thoughts. Milad.
First, I want to thank Ron, Natasha, and Danielle, and all the others who worked to make this vigil happen. Having grown up in San Carlos, like Ron said, I appreciate that the issues we've come to discuss have come to a small town like this and gained attention through both yesterday's and today's events. I'd also like to thank Danielle for asking me to speak. At first, I was definitely very hesitant to come talk today. The biggest reason for this was that until recently, I've never invested myself in understanding, let alone acting at all to help mend, the deep flaws in the U.S. that George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery's murders have shown a new spotlight on. This reality, coupled with the fact that I'm not Black, has led me to question my role in addressing systemic racism. Given that we live in a community where less than 1% of our neighbors are Black, and police brutality is something we've been introduced through forgotten stories rather than personal experience, I think my failure to fully recognize the prevalence of systemic racism in the U.S. prior to the past few weeks is, unfortunately, shared by many of you in the audience today. Yet, I know many of you also share the anger I've felt as I realized the reality of the situation at hand, and as I witnessed many continue to undermine oppression Black Americans undeniably face. Yet, I know many of you, taken in itself, I think the widespread outpour of emotions and protests in response to George Floyd's murder have been positive. But there's an elephant in the room that remains. African Americans have faced economic oppression and disproportionate violence at the hands of police for hundreds of years. So, why all of this now? I think this question takes two forms. The first is rightfully skeptical Black Americans posing the question to the rest of America. In this scenario, I'm afraid the all too simple and pathetic answer we can't deny is because of filmed murder, uproar on social media, and videos of huge protests were what it took to make the general public realize the urgency of the issue. Yet, non-Black Americans like myself, who now consider themselves allies to the Black community, particularly the youth, must ask themselves the same question. This requires honest thought and reflection. As I partially touched upon earlier, we are a product of the environment we've grown up in. Our community is not targeted by police, and most of us do not know what it is like to have our family members hurt or incarcerated for long periods of time over petty crimes or for no good reason at all. To put it in perspective, the last time I was pulled over for speeding, the cop let me go without a warning because he said he thought I looked like a good kid. As such, it's easy for us to be ignorant to the issues that plague Black America when tragedies such as George Floyd's murder do not dominate headlines. We forget that there are people whose skin tone might lead a bad cop to deem them a bad person instead of a good one. In an uncomfortable way, this idea embodies one of my least favorite cliches, that ignorance is bliss. Before tragedies like this one occur, we have the privilege to live relatively blissful lives, ignorant to the various forms of oppression African Americans still face. In hindsight, is that ignorance really so blissful then, if it is the exact thing that allows racism to persist and tragedies such as this one to ultimately unfold? A couple days ago, I was watching a French film called La Haine, which means the hate, which closes with a cartoon of a boy who's falling from a tall building and murmuring, "So far, so good," until he eventually lands, not pleasantly. This is meant to serve as an analogy for the pattern of life people living in a ghetto outside of Paris face as a result of systemic oppression. If you apply this analogy to the current situation, it's chilling to think of ourselves as largely turning our backs to the Black community as they fall from the proverbial building, and then being outraged once the inevitable happens. It's a dark example and it isn't perfect, but you get my point. Perhaps the most important part of understanding why now is also asking ourselves what's next. If I can offer one piece of advice without sounding too preachy, It's to actively reject the ignorance that naturally comes with being non-black and living in an affluent society such as this one. Seek gaps in your understanding and perspective, and fill them with knowledge. I truly believe that a thorough understanding of the issues in front of us and the role we can play in solving them, coupled with determination, will help us create a more just world. So read and listen and watch, especially if your first reaction to the content you encounter is discomfort. Impactful change will come when those who currently discount systemic racism choose to take a stand against it. Non-Black America must embrace the humility to learn and grow, rather than holding on to past states of mind. I'll end with a quote my English teacher sent me recently from Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance. Speak what you think now in hard words, and tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it contradict everything you said today. So you will be sure to be misunderstood. Is it so bad then to be misunderstood? Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood.
All right, thank you so much, Vlad. Learn, educate yourself. That's the advice that we're hearing today. All right, next up, we have, I think, one president that I am very happy to introduce. Rachel and Mir Chapman.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Amir Chapman, and I first would like to thank the organizers for having me today, along with all of you guys for coming out. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces, so thank you for that. I want to start by sharing a personal anecdote that some of you may have heard from the Belmont protest last week. Since elementary school, I've been able to count the number of Black students in my class on one hand. In almost every setting I've been in, I've been the only Black player, classmate, and group member. And for this reason, growing up, I've never been able to shake the feeling of being an outsider in my own community. But don't get me wrong, I have the best support system, mentors, and friends, many of you guys who are out in the crowd right now. But it's always been something that has been in the back of my mind and that I couldn't get rid of no matter how hard I tried. But seeing the massive amount of support that this community has given to the Black Lives Matter movement. So you guys care so deeply, and it makes me so proud of my community, this community right here. And it has helped me to diminish that feeling of isolation and feeling that I don't belong, which I've struggled with for the past 17 years. So thank you for that. So, when you start to feel discouraged or maybe question whether or not your actions are having an impact, just know that you aren't only serving the purpose of fighting racial inequality and a corrupt criminal justice system, you are showing your Black friends, peers, community members that you care for them, you're willing to fight by their side, and that they have a community backing them every step of the way. So continue to do that. But of course, that first part is important too. So let's talk about that. Many of you guys have probably seen this comparison from Twitter or Instagram, but this is not a Black Lives Matter Spirit Week. And as stupid as that sounds, it's what an awful amount of people have been treating it as. We've even had hashtag Blackout Tuesday, where people who haven't spoken up were able to rest assured that they've done their part. The Integrate Birmingham campaign lasted a month. The Greensboro sit-ins lasted 6 months. The Freedom Rides lasted 7 months. And the Montgomery bus boycott lasted 382 days. So you guys get the point. The fight cannot end here, and this is just the beginning. It's honestly baffling to me how the governing bodies of our country act so obviously upon their oppressive and discriminatory mentality. This corruption is why you see cities enforcing curfews for Black Lives Matter protests, but not for coronavirus. It's why you see transgender Americans losing their right to healthcare protections. And it's why you see LGBTQ plus families being prevented from adopting. There is a hierarchy of human value that we must shatter. We must take the dire circumstance we're in and fight for the safety of George Floyd and all Black men in America, who all too often have had the simple interaction with police turn into a death sentence. Similarly, we must fight for all Black women, trans men and women, all able bodies, and people of the LGBTQ plus community who are persecuted for something they cannot change about themselves. Black lives matter, but we shouldn't have to die to matter. And so after we leave this park today, I have 3 challenges for you guys. First, I want you to educate yourselves. If you want to enact change, you must empathize with the Black experience and have an understanding of the evolution of racism in our nation. We can't simply be content with the regurgitation of information about MLK and Harriet Tubman in our history classes. Through your research, you'll find exactly why all cops are bad for their complacency in a racist institution, even if you do have that nice uncle who's a cop. You'll find out why defunding the police will be beneficial to the criminal justice system, as well as many other aspects of society. You'll find out why we can't just get over slavery when we're experiencing modern day racism right now, and so much more that can aid you in this movement. So do this and challenge your friends to do it too. Welcome honest dialogue at events like these, have these conversations with your friends and family, and post on social media, anything to keep this movement going. If you guys have them on you, I'd like you to, at this moment, take your phones out and write these down. Okay, these are just some suggestions for you to educate yourselves. A couple movies I have are Just Mercy, 13th, and Selma, which is an oldie, but a goodie. And for books, I have Stamped from the Beginning, White Fragility, and How to Be an Anti-Racist. And on top of those, you have these books that the organizers have out for you guys today. Very generous of them, so after just come and pick those up. And $2 to the Black Lives Matter organization, their cause of their choice, for every person that watches or reads one of these suggestions, or like I said, any of these up here, or any other media that you find interesting about Black issues or Black art. So just text me, Snapchat me, Instagram. Obviously, I don't know all of you guys out there, but if you are somehow able to contact me, then I will donate $2 for every media that you do read. My second point is to vote. Unfortunately, I have missed the cut by 20 days, so I cannot vote. I know, sad. But it's just another way to achieve the equality and justice we are seeking. And make sure that you're making an educated vote. Find out how the officials have voted on issues in the past and consider what type of possible biases or discriminatory mindset has pushed to make those decisions. And lastly, support Black-owned businesses. It is imperative that you take the amount of love you have for the Black culture, that's music, dancing, sports, you take that and you give an equal amount, if not more, to the livelihood of Black Americans. I'm not saying make a complete switch to solely Black-owned businesses, but if you have the opportunity to choose one over the other, supporting the Black business does go a long way and helps combat the pressure and discrimination that they already face in the industry. So as I end, I want to once again thank you all so much for being here today and for all the work you've already done so far to ensure a better future. But as I said earlier, we are far from done. I lastly want to implore upon you to no longer accept the things that you cannot change. You need to change the things you cannot accept. Thank you guys so much.
All right, thank you very much. The fight goes on. We are not done. And Rachel Amir asked us for 3 promises, and I want everyone to give her the promise. So I want to hear a loud cheer if you promise to do this. The first one is educate yourself. Do you promise to do that? No, I got to hear you. Do you promise to do that? On a personal note, I just saw the movie 13th. I thought it was very powerful. It opened my eyes to things I hadn't even considered before. I found it very moving. The next thing Rachel Amir asked was vote. Who's going to vote? No, who's going to vote? That's one more promise that you owe her and all of our speakers. And then finally, the last promise that I want you to make to Rachel Amir and all the speakers up here. Who's going to support Black-owned businesses? Who's going to support Black-owned businesses? Thank you very much. You all owe her now. All right. Now, for a more, I would say, a solemn moment, I'd like to call up Leanne Brown.
Hi. We are all gathered here under some horrific circumstances. Circumstances that have plagued the Black community for centuries, perpetuated by the fact that the first organized policing body in the United States were slave patrols, which we then developed the police force on top of, by the fact that the prison industrial complex is just slavery that's undergone a palatable rebranding. Our community is oppressed, devalued, and dehumanized. Now, I appreciate you all joining in solidarity after the brutal murder of George Floyd. No one deserves to die like that, no matter the alleged crime. But I must ask you, did you care about George Floyd's life before he died? Do you care about Black people in general before we die? Do you care enough about us to educate yourselves and your peers on how to use your privilege before we die? Do you care enough to call out racist friends and family before we die? Do you work to dispel the myths and stereotypes surrounding our community before we die? Do you view Black people that you do not know personally in a positive light before we die? Do you care enough to thoroughly analyze the propositions you vote for to see how they will affect Black people before we die? Do you avidly research politicians to know the ways in which their past political preferences and policies have influenced the oppression of Black people before deciding to elect or re-elect them before we die? Do you look inwardly to see the ways in which you individually benefit from white supremacy and anti-Blackness? Do you care when we receive longer sentences for committing the same crime as you? Do you care that we are vastly underrepresented in positions of power? Do you care enough to fight the system that is actively killing and enslaving us instead of just settling for the same reform that we've gotten over and over again? Do you read books written by Black authors about Black struggles? Do you buy Black-made art, listen to Black musicians that aren't just the mainstream ones, watch Black movies? Do you make a point to support and spotlight Black-owned businesses? Do you check in on the Black people in your life after a lynching? Robert Fuller was lynched in Palmdale, California this week. Did you care enough about that to raise awareness about him or any of the other Black lives that we've lost since or before George Floyd? If the answer to these questions is no, then I'm sorry, but you're not doing enough. Signing petitions, donating, posting on social media after we die, although appreciated and greatly needed, is simply not enough. You must uplift us in our day-to-day lives, value our opinions, amplify our fight, or else change doesn't come. As a community that has been historically oppressed and disenfranchised, we cannot do it alone. The civil rights movement relied heavily on its non-Black allies to help push the needle. If you have Black coworkers, Black friends, Black family members, it is your obligation to support us in this. Otherwise, you choose to ignore a major aspect of our identity for which we are treated differently by the institutions in this country. If the same care and concern and support was shown for Black lives as we've witnessed in the past 2 weeks, then I have a feeling things would be different. Please, educate yourselves. Listen, read, speak up, because we need you. You'll never know what it's like to fear for your life whenever you see a police officer, and I know it's hard to put yourself in my shoes. But please help me ensure that I, and others who look like me and George Floyd, don't have to fear for ours anymore. Thank you. Thank you.
Very nice.
So next we are going to have 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence. And I'm going to read off some names of the lives that we've lost. George Floyd.
So, as we move forward, I'd like to say just a few wrap-up things. I think the point's been made here several times. If you're African American, the struggle, I'm afraid, probably continues. The struggle continues. But if you're white and you're here, the struggle is just beginning. This is not you show up, you go home, you're done. This is where you start to become an ally going forward, not just today, not just tomorrow. As we heard, these things take weeks, months, years. So I want to hear it. Clap louder if you're in it for the long haul. It starts today. Support Black Lives Matter while they're still living. We have a lot of great organizations here. ACLU, NAACP, Minnesota Freedom Fund, join Colin Kaepernick's surf organization, Color of Change. You have the ability, donate to these organizations. These organizations are making a change. You don't want these organizations, find one that is making a change in your community and support them. Support Black-owned businesses. Vote. And educate yourselves. We have a bunch of books here. They are free. Come up and take them. Only take them if you promise to read them, if you promise to have a discussion with your kids. A lot of families here have a discussion with your kids, with your neighbors, with your parents. A lot of books up here. The reading bug is here as well. A lot of books for children. Educate yourself, and we have the books and resources here to get you started. So I want to hear one more cheer. Make that promise that you're going to educate yourselves. I'd like to thank our speakers, Cindy Chan, Elad Shafei, Rachel Amir Chapman, Leanne Brown. I'd also like to thank the organizers who helped put this together, Danielle Lapcampagne, Natasha Melly, Rob Anson, you don't get enough credit. And we have 60, 70 people online, and that is courtesy of JT Eden. Thank you very much. And my name is Ron Gabizan. If you want to know anything more about PPAG or the organization to put this together, come see us afterwards. We have a sign-up sheet if you want to learn about more about what we're up to. But as I said, there's a lot of resources here. Please come up and take them. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and the fight continues.